I'm here to share my thoughts about the role of civil society in access to justice and about the judicial independence, although I'm a victim of enforced disappearance. And this tragic incident of my life is the fulcrum of my whole struggle of my life. And it will be reflected as I speak to you. And well, my husband, Masood Janjua, is an enforced disappeared person, and he disappeared 17 years ago on 30th July 2005. At that time, Pakistan was ruled by military dictator General Pervez Musharraf. Later on, when I struggled for the rule of law and for all the disappeared to be traced, I founded a group, which is a victim-based organization, Defense of Human Rights. And it has so far registered 2,980 cases of enforced disappearances. And my success is that out of these 1,000 detainees or torture victims have been surfaced. So the advent of 9/11 brought drastic changes in the world, and more so in Pakistan and Afghanistan, from where people were abducted, their human rights were violated, and they were transported for sake of dollars to Guantanamo and to more notorious prisons in Afghanistan like Black Hole, Pul-e-Charkhi, and Kandahar. Unfortunately, my husband was one of those who was disappeared, and this grave violations of human rights went on for around 20 long years, as Pakistan was an ally to this war on terror. We had to face the wrath of the US as well. So my struggle started immediately after the disappearance of my husband, and I started spearheading many protest demonstrations in front of the Parliament House, Supreme Court, PM House, and so notice was taken for my husband and for his friend, Faisal. They both disappeared together. So that suo motu, which started in 2005 December, was actually the first point when civil society got engaged with the judicial mechanisms, and there was no need for anyone to be a lawyer. Rather, any person, any ordinary person can apply to the Supreme Court, and they would be heard and they would be given justice. So in 2005 December it started, and since I had found it, and there were so many victims which were approaching me, and we were also collaborating with them for the campaign and lobbying and meeting the parliamentarians so that we can, catch them red-handed and say, what have you done for rule of law, and why the disappeared have not been given their due rights? Are they not a person before law? So that was how our movement kicked off, and there were many other organizations like HRCP and independent petitions which were coming on. But at the time of emergency was imposed in 2007, there were 485 cases of the disappeared, which were being pleaded in the Supreme Court of Pakistan by the civil society. So when a hype was created because of the disappeared, the General Pervez Musharraf resorted into, pressurizing the Chief Justice of Pakistan, at that time, Chief Justice Muhammad Chaudhry, to resign, and made him dysfunctional. So that was the start of 2 years of judicial movement in which the whole legal fraternity was in streets, and they were raising slogans. We were part and parcel of them, because who can expect to get justice if the courts are not there? If the judges of the superior judiciary was house arrested. So that was why we were part and parcel of this judiciary, and we were facing the baton charge, tear gas, weather extremes, and whatnot. Finally, on 16th of in March 2009, judiciary was restored, But unfortunately, they refused to take the cases of the discipline. So again, me and my organization had to sit in outside the camp in front of the Supreme Court for 13 days and nights. And that was also in extreme weather. But we made it a point that the judiciary must hear our cases. They came back, but the judiciary which came back was a compromised judiciary. And Supreme Court started the case, but within a few months, there was a commission of inquiry which was formed so that the cases of the disappeared can be removed from the eyes of the media. So the international community does not know what is happening about the disappeared. So unfortunately, there were many cases like my husband's case and many top of the list cases. One, I would want to relate one of the cases, which is the Mohammed Shah case. His brother Yasin Shah was in internment center Malakand, and Supreme Court knows about this case. And he was, a production order was issued that Yasin Shah must be presented before the court. But unfortunately, he was again disappeared from Malakand along with 35 inmates of that internment center. So that was a blow to judiciary. Then there was a long debate about whether Supreme Court has the jurisdiction to hear about the cases of the armed forces or not, because the internment centers are the army facilities where all these cases, all these former disappeared are actually they are languishing to be reunited with their families. So then second case is that of my husband Masood Janjua, and that is also an example of impunity, because in spite of all the evidences, witnesses, when there was the last time in 2014, evidence was being recorded on video link, and Justice Jawad Khwaja was the judge. And on the last minute, when we came to the Supreme Court, we saw that all the composition of the judges has changed, and Justice Jawad Khwaja has been transferred to Lahore. So the case, which was at the point of being resolved, just could not be heard, and the witness could not be recorded. So that was another example of impunity. But to some extent, the Supreme Court did give some of the good judgments. For example, in 2013, it stated that states are obliged to protect their citizens from enforced disappearances, regardless of whether or not the state has ratified the convention. In alternative, it can also be contended that enforced disappearances are crimes against humanity, and that Supreme Court of Pakistan upheld this argument in this suo motu case, that despite Pakistan not being a signatory to ICPPED, the court could apply the provisions of the convention in order to achieve the ends of justice. So, and my presentation will not be complete if I do not mention about the Commission of Inquiry. This Commission of Inquiry registered so far 8,600 cases, and they claim to have disposed of 6,000 cases, and 2,238 are still to be accounted for, whereas they have 600 production orders, which are never honored, and their own mandate has never been honored by themselves. So this is, I'm talking about the second Commission of Inquiry. The first Commission of Inquiry was concluded in December 2010. And at the end of its tenure, it issued 250 pages long report, and pointing fingers towards the intelligence agencies for doing the unconstitutional and unfundamental things of picking up the citizens of Pakistan and their involvement in the human rights abuse. So it was proven by the first commission that intelligence agencies have their hand in the disappearance of the citizens. So the Human Rights community, the civil society was raising hue and cry about this failure of this commission of inquiry, of not respecting its own mandate, and its head being a very notorious judge who happened to be involved in harassing the women family members of the disappeared. But in spite of that, in spite of our repeated hue and cry, that person, that notorious judge, is still sitting, and he has the audacity to continue hearing the cases of the disappeared. Eventually, on 16th October 2018, finally, we had to leave the premises of the Supreme Court of Pakistan when all the cases of the disappeared were formally transferred to the commission. At that time, my organization, Defense of Human Rights, had only 90 cases left out of 749 cases, which we filed over the between 2005 to 2018. Then we had no other option but to go to the country's high courts. And at the moment as well, we are filing our cases and pleading our cases in the country's high court. And we are receiving very good response. If not their praise, but at least very good precedents are being created. There's a case of two brothers, Sadiq Amin and Zahid Amin. Zahid Amin disappeared when a raid was conducted at his home, and in front of his whole family members, and on gunpoint he was taken away. In the very same way, in 2021, his younger brother who was pursuing his case was disappeared. And there is a CCTV footage. The case has been filed in the Rawalpindi High Court. And later on, when it was disposed of, we immediately filed it in the Islamabad High Court. So it's still going on, but justice has not been served yet. Sajid Mahmood is an engineer of Islamabad who was disappeared in 2016. And this case is important because his lawyer, Umar Jillani, highlighted the compensation and the subsistence factor of the family, because they have to survive without resources. So that was the first time a landmark judgment was given that subsistence will be given to the family, and heavy fines were imposed on the authorities whose hand was found to be in the disappearance of Sajid. There's success stories as well. Many people were traced, and one of them was Bakshal Dev. He was a small vendor who was selling dry fruits in the streets of Rawalpindi. He and his brother were traced after 2 years of litigation in the Lahore High Court Rawalpindi bench. So in the same way, like we had an environment of activism and judicial activism in the Supreme Court in way between 2013 and 15. The same kind of environment is now created in the country's High Court because of the active participation of civil society, the legal experts like Iman Hazir Mazari, Omar Jillani, Colonel Nauman Reayat, and just to name a few. There are many. It's a very big pool of supported lawyers who are not charging a single rupee of fees from the victims, and they are proactively fighting cases. So in the event of fighting these cases, I was nominated to be the amicus curiae by the Chief Justice of the Islamabad High Court. And I'm thankful to him for allowing me to speak in all the cases of the disappeared. So it is because of these litigation and constantly struggling that now we have an order which states that the Chief Justice of Islamabad High Court has summoned the Prime Minister of Pakistan on 9th September 2022. And The judge went on to say the existence of phenomena of enforced disappearance is intolerable, and more so when overwhelming evidence manifests that it has remained and continued to be an undeclared tactic policy of the state. The perception of the involvement of law enforcing agencies, particularly the armed forces, in this grave crime against humanity is the most profound violation of public interest and policy. So we have this very good orders, and I went on to give recommendations to the Islamabad High Court and also to a federal cabinet committee which was formed as a result of the strong orders by the High Court. This cabinet committee is supposedly going to give recommendations to the prime ministers within 3 weeks of time. So out of the recommendations, I will briefly outline the solution from my end, which is that the Commission of Inquiry must abolish, and we should have instead a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which should be headed by upright judges, human rights defenders, and representatives of the families of the disappeared, because this issue needs empathy. This issue needs an extraordinary compassion because it is committed by the state itself. Number two, that the government must criminalize the enforced disappearance by a law. And either it should be an amendment in the PPC, the law of Pakistan, but it should have the same spirit as is observed in the United Nations International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. Number three is the political will, which the Islamabad High Court judge has also pointed out, that all the disappeared should be traced immediately, compensated, rehabilitated, according to international standards. The stakeholders like federal government, armed forces, judiciary, and admin must exercise political will to completely resolve this issue with full commitment, compassion, and empathy. So this is the 3 points which I have given to the Cabinet Committee as well as to the High Court Islamabad. So in all this environment of activism in the hybrid regimes like the countries like Pakistan, what actually we only have hope. And with the hope of, with the help of this hope, activism, civil society initiatives, and lobbying, and being engaged with the courts, what we get is that out of these 3,000 cases of defense of human rights, 1,000 are traced and released. And at the end, I would like to just say and emphasize more on justice, that it is not found in the courts. Justice is actually the result of the purity of the intentions of all the stakeholders of a nation. And the path to true, pure democracy is the path to better justice. So thank you so much. I'll be here for any of the questions the audience may ask.
Thank you, Amina, for providing us with fresh insights on the role of civil society in human rights protection in the context of authoritarian hybrid regimes. Now I will invite Aisha Banu Tuna to share her thoughts on SLAP. The SLAP abbreviation stands for Strategic Lawsuits Against Public Participation and the Role of Journalists in Turkey. Over to you, Aisha. I will request you, Banu, that you just briefly explain your affiliation and your ongoing activities before you start presenting the talk.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Nauman. It's a pleasure to be here among these important names and the audience. I am a journalist of 25 years. 3 years ago, after the takeover of the Hürriyet Daily, I was working for Hürriyet Daily newspaper. After 3 years ago, after the takeover by a pro-government business person, I was fired from my job. I am the president of Istanbul branch of TGS, Turkish Journalists Union. I'm a freelance journalist now and also working for the Truth, Justice and Memory Center, which is an NGO mostly dealing with forced disappearances. The fact that I'm making a presentation today at this panel shows that the independence of judiciary and independent media are not in good shape in Turkey. I chose the slaps filed against journalists as the title because a significant part of the daily work of especially critical journalists in Turkey is to attend to the hearings or the lawsuits brought against them, or to follow the hearings of their colleagues. If I can, I prepared the presentation, if I can share it. I think I will manage to do so. Okay. First, I would like to set the scene, portray the scene. This building is called Istanbul Palace of Justice. I should name it with palace quotation. When it was opened in 2011, it was bragged as the largest courthouse in Europe. Now this place is a center where journalists and right defenders are tried. There's a journalist's case almost every day, and journalists have to follow the cases of their colleagues instead of reporting their news. This photo was taken during a protest as well. Those pictures belong to journalists, and it's a recent one. Only in May in 2022, 37 journalists appeared before the court. And last year, in total, 241 journalists prosecuted in the year. In Turkey, the judiciary is one of the most frequent used mechanisms to block journalists, with numerous investigations, detentions, and lawsuits. Turkey ranks among 180 countries at 153rd range last year, according to World Press Freedom Index of Reporters Without Borders. According to the organization, although Turkey is no longer the country that imprisons the most journalists in the world, but the risk of arrest, probation, or ban, or foreign travel still remains. Okay, then what crimes are the journalists charged with? Here is a list of the most common charges. Making propaganda for a terrorist organization is mostly aims Kurdish journalists, but after the coup d'etat in 2016, also non-Kurdish journalists can be charged with this crime. Illegally obtaining or giving personal data, membership of a terrorist organization, aiding a terrorist organization, insulting a public official, insulting the president, which is the most common one in today's Turkey, opposing the law on meetings and demonstrations, degrading the Turkish nation or state, incitement to hatred, degrading a sector of population or its religious values. What made this possible? How did independence of the judiciary in Turkey eroded? We could say it was never totally independent, but the things got worse, as I said before, after the coup d'etat in 2016 and during the transition to presidential system the year after in 2017. But I would like to, first I would like to give some information, detailed information about the cases. This chart belongs to MLSA's Media and Law Studies Association in Turkey. Belongs to May report. journalists tried of terrorism-related charges most. I mean, among other critical groups, journalists with the percentage of 62.2 are the largest group tried of terrorism-related charges. And this chart shows journalists tried of insulting the president. Again, you could see that journalists are the largest group among other critical groups. Okay, coming to the judiciary system. Here you see the structure of the Board of Judges and Prosecutors. The structure of this board changed during the last, let's say, 7 years. Changes took place, the last changes took place in 2017. Constitutional amendment referendum. During this referendum, the name of the board was changed at first. The phrase high was removed from its name, and the name of the board became the Board of Judges and Prosecutors. Before it was High Board of Judges and Prosecutors. With the referendum, the duties and powers of the board did not change, but some arrangements were made in the structure of the board. Here you can see the total number of the members is 13. The Minister of Justice and Undersecretary remained as a subordinate member of the board. They are natural members. The remaining members, 4 of them assigned by the president himself. The remaining 7 members assigned by the parliament, but among judges in the Supreme Court, among judges, Council of State, and among scholars, law scholars. The problem is, in the parliament, AKP has the majority, so members of the Supreme Court and Council of State decided highly by the president himself. So this structure shows that almost all 13 members of the board, directly or indirectly, decided by the president himself, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Okay, strategic lawsuits, slaps. This type of legal action is increasingly being used by powerful people, including state officials, to shut down criticism coming from activists, academics, whistleblowers, and journalists. In case of Turkey, slaps mostly target journalists and right defenders. The judiciary is one of the most frequently used mechanisms to stop journalists, as I mentioned before. Such use of judiciary accuses that a comment about the depreciation of Turkish lira harms the country's economic performance, that the news about the forest fires in the summer could turn into an accusation of trying to render the country incapable, created a new climate for journalists that is difficult to predict, actually. These 4 people are 4 examples among hundreds of journalists. Here in the first line, you see Çiğdem Toker. She mostly reports on economics and financial matters. She is targeted with millions of Turkish lira compensation lawsuits for asking public resources to account. In the second line, you see Abdurrahman Gök. He reports from the Kurdish region, Diyarbakır, and he is on trial with a 20-year prison sentence for photographing the death of university student Kemal Korkut by the law enforcement during the Newroz celebrations in 2017. Third one is Rushan Takva. He is a young journalist in Van, also a Kurdish region. He was targeted by the Ministry of Interior after covering the migration originating from Afghanistan. A lawsuit was filed against him for membership in a terrorist organization because he followed a planned march in Van. This is also important because almost for 1,500 days, demonstrations are banned in Van continuously. Canan Kaya is a different example because the slap was filed by a private person, by Demirören. He is a pro-government business person who took over Hürriyet, where I used to work for. A case brought against Kaya by she is working for Medya Koridoru. It's an online news outlet. Because of her news article titled Demirören yolun sonuna yaklaşıyor, which means Demirören coming to the end of the road. So how do we deal with these slaps in Turkey? Case monitoring here has been increasingly adopted as a method in the last 10 years and is mostly carried out by non-governmental organizations working in different fields. Litigation monitoring trainings are frequently among the capacity building trainings, and lots of hundreds of journalists join those trainings. Case monitoring is an important topic in the field of journalism here because there are several reasons to it. Because the first is that it creates an income model for the journalists who are trying to survive, stay independent, have been pushed out of the system, or have never entered the system. The problematic ownership structure of the Turkish media has resulted in 1/3 of the journalists being unemployed today. 90% of the media is in the hands of pro-government business people. Another reason that makes litigation important is that it is an extension of the right to fair trial and the principle of publicity of hearings. It is also used as a tool of pressure on the judicial system, whose impartiality is doubted. The reports that emerge as a result of the case monitoring allow the judicial pressure on journalism to be visible, recorded, and announced internationally. Okay, I'm going to keep this short, and thank you so much for bearing with me.
Thank you very much, Banu, for sharing your thoughts on strategic lawsuits against public participation in Turkey. Now I will invite Moshe Yekmalian to share his thoughts on human rights and rule of law in Turkey. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Just something came to my mind when Banu was making her presentation, a story about a journalist, an anchor of CNN Turk, Nevşin Mengü. She was dismissed only because she said that the meeting between President Erdogan and Trump lasted only 20 minutes. The word only played a crucial role, and the presidential administration contacted and put the pressure on the CNN Turk to fire her immediately. So just to imagine what kind of pressures and what situation we have in Turkey in relation to basic human rights. I will mainly speak about impunity and misinterpretation and abuse of anti-terrorism laws in the country, because given the recent also foreign political activities of the current Turkish regime on putting pressure on certain countries to extradite so-called terrorist ADs or terrorists or members of terrorist organizations, we will have a look who they call terrorists as usual, basically. And you will see that these anti-terrorism laws are stretched impossibly towards every political dissent. Every political opponent is called a terrorist and is put under enormous pressure, because that's a very convenient and severe tool in the hands of the current political regime. And I must also say that none of the existing authoritarian regimes has enjoyed so much autonomy of action and non-criticism as Turkish government is experiencing, because any other authoritarian regime that would have done 1/10 of what the Turkish president and his party is doing in country, they would face enormous sanctions and criticism. But we don't see it in case of Turkey, unfortunately. I will start with presenting cases, a short presentation on anti-terrorism legislation. And this is an issue in many countries around the world, especially starting from 2001, War on Terror, where all the states started adopting anti-terrorism laws, mostly without taking into consideration any human rights standards or approaches. There was also no guidance on adoption of the relevant laws, as no guidelines before that were existing. In Turkey, however, the abuse of anti-terrorism legislation became endemic right after the attempt of coup d'etat in 2016. The anti-terrorism laws are practically not used to fight the terrorists, but they are rather used to silence the civil society and any dissent voices. In Turkey, terrorism-related accusation implies immediate and unconditional detention. Mostly the human rights defenders are targeted through this law, and often even in cases when the evidences are either non-existent or scarce, the anti-terrorism laws provide plenty of opportunities to the repressive prosecution to put the person in jail and make all the materials and evidences secret and not provide any of the case-related materials to the defense lawyers. Especially in recent years, the use of so-called secret witness statements, this is a new category which is brought forward. The secret witness statement was commonplace when the identity of a person providing testimony is not possible to track, and most often people are put to trial through secret witness testimony without knowing who the secret witness was. And the person's identity, the secret witness identity, is not disclosed at any stage of investigation or court hearing, nowhere. This is very often abused, and the secret witness testimony is often basis for the arrest warrant against the suspect. The terrorism-related cases have also significantly eroded the Defense Lawyers Institute, as they have much more restrictions in access to their defendants. In prisons, those charged with terrorism accusation form a separate caste of prisoners with no rights and particularly vulnerable to torture and ill treatment. They are often left out of any amnesty or early release initiatives. Yes. Yeah, and early release initiatives. The anti-terror law number 3713 is most extensively used against human rights defenders, accusing them from allegedly being part of the terrorist organization or supporting one. Even the bank transfer or payment to the legal fees of a lawyer who is supporting someone accused of terrorism activities or being part of the terrorism movement, even money transfer to a lawyer is treated as support to the terrorism or getting money from a terrorist to a member of a terrorist organization. So basically, under such circumstances, one can imagine what kind of impunity is flourishing inside the closed institutions. For instance, in his report of 2015, the UN Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial Summary or Arbitrary Executions, Christoph Heinz, underlined that fight against impunity remains a serious challenge in Turkey. Vulnerable groups remain particularly at risk. The lack of fully independent mechanisms for accountability and great challenges experienced in judicial system feed into the practice, as well as the procreation of impunity in the country. Similarly, the UN Committee Against Torture has repeatedly highlighted serious concerns about the pattern of delays, inaction, and otherwise unsatisfactory handling of investigations, prosecutions, and conviction of police, law enforcement, and military personnel for violence, ill-treatment, and torture offenses. Such problem is most apparently in the countless acquittal, dismissal, or non-prosecution verdicts at the Turkish domestic level that can be seen in the report of the UN Committee Against Torture. This problem has increasingly persisted in more recent years, especially in the aftermath of June 2015 parliamentary elections, led to the collapse of a two-year peace process with the PKK. Since July 2015, the Turkish government has adopted a policy of reminiscent of the violence of 1990s, which is marked by a campaign of counterinsurgency, declaration of open-ended curfews, and anti-terrorism operations that killed and displaced a large number of civilians and caused destruction in the Kurdish region. A report of severe human rights violations of violence by security forces have become commonplace over the period. If you look into the website of the Turkish Human Rights Foundation and the Turkish Human Rights Association as well, you will see that there is over 3,000 cases listed with circumstances, with names, and also details of how those 3,000 cases of killings of those civilians happened in the southeast part of Turkey during the military operation. One of a particular striking case concerns the killing of the Haji Lokman Birlik, a Kurdish militant whose body was filmed by the Turkish security forces as it was dragged behind a police car on the streets of Sırnak district in October 2016. In the wake of in July 2016 attempted coup, the entrenched practice of impunity and allegations of torture and treatment have reached an unprecedented level. In July 2016, Turkey experienced an attempt of military coup allegedly perpetrated by a faction within the Turkish army loyal to the so-called Gülen movement, leaving 246 killed and 2,000 wounded, sending a shockwave through Turkey. On July, Turkish government declared nationwide state of emergency pursuant to then enforce Article 119 and 121 of the Turkish Constitution. Other than that, the same day, the Turkish government informed the Council of Europe of its intention to derogate from European Convention on Human Rights, and similar notification was launched with the United Nations pursuant to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Since the initial declaration, the state of emergency was prolonged 7 times for a total period of 24 months until it eventually lifted on July 2018. But we'll get back to this point because there are these emergency decrees that were not dismissed, despite the fact that the curfew was lifted. In the wake of emergency declaration, the Turkish authorities adopted numerous emergency decrees, introducing sweeping measures affecting a broad range of human rights. The numbers are mind-blasting. More than 130,000 persons, including military personnel, police officers, and teachers, were detained, and more than 90,000 people were charged. More than 3,000 institutions, including 190 media outlets, as well as schools, dormitories, associations, and foundations, were disbanded and liquidated with immediate effect. Furthermore, more than 150,000 judges, prosecutors, military personnel, police officers, teachers, and other civil servants were collectively dismissed from their positions. And all these numbers could be found under the monitoring reports of the UN bodies and those of Council of Europe. Talking about the emergency decrees, I would like to emphasize that the security operation conducted by the army in the southeast region also after 2016 was continuing. During this period, Turkey also adopted series of emergency decrees, 31 emergency decrees, which are in force until now. Even the state of the emergency has been ended in 2018. These emergency decrees significantly affect the human rights and procedural guarantees of individuals, groups, and organizations suspected of being involved in the attempted coup. With the Gülenist movement or not, activities perceived to be related to terrorism or not, any person could be accused of being a supporter of the coup d'etat attempt. With regard to the International Covenant of Civil Political Rights, the UN Human Rights Committee has noted with the Article 14 of ICCPR is not included in the list of non-derogable rights of the Covenant. However, Turkey has particularly mentioned the article as the one that they have derogations. The guarantees of fair trial may never be made subject of measure of derogation that will circumvent the protection of non-derogable rights. The committee concluded that deviating from fundamental principles of fair trial, including the presumption of innocence, is prohibited at all times. The emergency decrees with the force of law, and in Turkish it's Kanun Hükmünde Kararname, that they were introduced following the failed coup, have imposed sweeping security measures and have deviated significantly from usual procedural and administrative guarantees.
Hussain, sorry for the interruption. We have 2 minutes.
Okay. This legal, administrative, and financial criminal liabilities should not arise in respect to persons who have adopted the decisions and fulfilled their duties within the scope of the decree of the law. Which means that none of the security operations or the participants in these security operations, the special forces personnel, can be held accountable for any of their deeds that they have done during the their operations. And there is I would like to mention this, in accordance with the above mentioned provisions, the Constitutional Court of Turkish Republic decided in a landmark ruling of 9th of August 2016 that it was not competent to review the emergency decrees, here thereby effectively depriving individuals who had suffered violations of their rights and freedoms under the decrees of any remedy. The commission was established later on to look into the decrees, but it was never produced any viable results. Just to wrap up, as you said, because the time is running, I would like to mention that the rule of law and declared principles of zero tolerance towards torture, towards violations of law or any other deprivation of liberty, the zero tolerance policies of the Turkish government have failed because in all cases listed and on all circumstances, the authorities cracking down on judiciary, civil society, and journalists is unprecedented. Sorry, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for such a talk on the rule of law and human rights in Turkey. Now, I will invite Matiullah Jan to share his thoughts on judicial independence and media in Pakistan. But before I invite him to talk, let me briefly introduce him. He's a journalist, social media and communication trainer, and a media law expert. He's managing personal YouTube news channel with MJTV with over 196,000 subscribers. He is a former host of an investigative talk show at Waqt TV. He's also a special correspondent for Supreme Court and Legal Affairs. He pioneered the first ever investigative TV show on Dawn TV, focusing on unethical and corrupt practices of Pakistani media. He also daily write columns for Daily The Nation and a Monday column in Urdu language, Daily Waqt on national socio-political issues. Above all, what makes him distinctive from all other journalists is that he is quite vocal about the role of the judiciary, and due to which he faced backlashes from different branches of the government, including but not limited to the judiciary, military, and the government. So let's listen to him about his experiences. Over to you, Matiullah. Mati, you are muted. Can you let me? Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nauman, for giving me this opportunity to speak about something which I report on daily basis. I've been covering Supreme Court, High Court, the Election Commission, and other courts for the last 26 years now. I have been a court reporter for a long time, and it was during these 26 years that I had this chance of working for not just English and Urdu print media, but newswire agencies, television channels, and international Reuters television as well, and then Dawn Television English. And I worked for state media as well, but I've been most of the time reporting from the courts. So my passion and my focus has always been on the legal affairs. And this may be a handicap for a journalist, because I, as a journalist, tend to behave and see things like a lawyer in my personal and professional life, which sometimes creates a lot of problems for us. We see things in black and white, and more accurately than an ordinary journalist who has not been aware of the legal aspects of various stories that they are supposed to be working on. Whereas I keep telling my students, my colleagues, that journalism is all about violation of some law, some rule, some constitutional right. So every story contains some kind of violation. That's why it becomes a story. So with this background, if you ask me about the independence of judiciary in Pakistan, I think in countries like Pakistan, where democracy is most of the time in transition, independence of judiciary is all about independence of the people, and the independence of the parliament, independence of the government to take decisions. Unfortunately, we have a very controversial constitutional and political history, wherein out of 75 years of our existence, since our creation in 1947, most of the time we were ruled by martial laws, the dictators. About 36 years direct military rules, and rest of the time some people may call it democracy, but I would call it as an indirect military rule in Pakistan. So if we talk about independence of judiciary, for me, I think the judiciary in Pakistan was as independent as the people in Pakistan have been, living under various stints of martial law and other types of governments that we may now describe in our own words in different ways. So by covering Supreme Court in particular, I think the biggest problem has been the political cases that every now and then come to Supreme Court, and then the overreaching arm of the judiciary in the name of enforcement of human rights and the judicial activism that we have seen in the last about 30 years now. So this judicial activism has worked more to benefit what we see as judicial engineering in Pakistan, and less for enforcement of fundamental rights. This has actually politicized the judiciary a lot, and various judgments that we have seen even during martial laws, like one in General Zia's era, where a prime minister was hanged in a murder case. All these judgments continue to be part of our constitutional history, and most of us, are really too ashamed to even refer to them as case law or as a court judgment, which can be referred to or cited as a precedence. So with this kind of history, I think we continue to face this continuous interference from the military in different forms, and judiciary at times, and particularly nowadays, seems to be working more not as an independent arm, but as an arm of the dictatorial forces in the country. We have seen how governments have been removed through the judicial verdicts, how prime ministers were hanged, referring to the case of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto back in 1979, to prime ministers being convicted for contempt of court and removed, dislodged from the governments, and then prime minister being disqualified for lifetimes in the name of not being honest and not being, coming up to the standards which were laid down by the Constitution, the religious and the legal standards. So with all these kinds of judgments, we continue to see judges and the judiciary in Pakistan being more political than judicial. And the worst thing is that with all those political decisions, they had that legal acumen to justify it on the legal side as well, and making it a precedent, in fact, making a blunder a precedent for the future generation as well. So this is the kind of situation we are facing. And as a court reporter, I see media now really becoming far more active, but at the same time, far more under pressure than it was in the past. Previously, we have seen media when it was only about the newspapers and state media, some private newspapers being directly controlled and pressurized by the dictators like General Zia, who would arrest journalists, put them in jail, flog them publicly, accuse them of various crimes. And from those days to today, when we have a huge private media industry, we see them coming under corporate pressure, economic pressure, because the most powerful military establishment also now runs a business empire, and which conveniently uses its economic muscle as well to control the media. So with this kind of situation, with judiciary becoming more active politically and becoming a part of the engineering, the political engineering, and media, although expanding a lot, but coming under more and more pressure because of the economic dependence on the powerful economic players, including the military establishment. I think neither the judiciary which
I think we have lost him. He's frozen, which is not something unexpected because he is participating from the field. Hey, okay, so let's wait for him if he is able to log out and log on, and then he can cover up whatever he has missed during the question and answer session, which we are about to begin. So the question and answer session is, the floor is open for question and answer, and I have two questions, one for Banu and other for Amina. The first question which I have for Banu is that it's from Felicity Kalunga. The questioner is Felicity Kalunga, and he or she is asking that from the cases that you have been monitoring, how would you rate the judgments of courts in terms of their capacity to protect the freedoms of journalists? And this first, and the same question connected to it, this is, how do the authorities deal with judges who decide in favor of the journalists?
Okay, thanks for the question. Actually, acquittals are not rare, but I think the main purpose is mostly is not to put journalists in jail for at least for the last, let's say, 3-4 years, but to intimidate them and to keep them busy with these cases, with this files. But if an acquittal comes despite the directions coming from the government, if they are giving directions otherwise, then an exile decision might come from the Minister of Justice or from the Board of Judges and Prosecutors. Or prosecutors might find a way to retry this person, this journalist, as it happened in Kavala case. He is a rights defender, he is not a journalist, but see it's happening, so that might be a method to retry.
Thank you very much. And there's another question from, if I can read it correctly, pronounce it correctly, is Abaidun. His question is for Amina, and I think it's a very important question. He's talking about how different organizations are financed. So how different organizations, civil society organizations, are financed. And I think it's important question in context of every developing country, including but not limited to Egypt, African countries, Pakistan. Whenever the government try to discredit or try to weaken civil society organizations' efforts, they come up with these allegations that actually these are funded and there's a big conspiracy again, larger conspiracy of which they are part of that conspiracy. So in that context, it's a very good question. And the question is that how, he did appreciate your efforts, and he or she also said that you deserve international award, but he just wondered at how you were able to finance your activities.
Well, when the struggle started, my main source of litigation and whatever I was doing was my husband's college. It was an IT college which I was trying to run, but in the course of my struggle, I actually, drained the college. And after that, when there was nothing left in that college, then we publicly announced for funds, and all the members of our organization, which are members of civil society, and they are doing different kind of business, or they are lawyers. So we ourselves donated to this cause. And now we are also a member of AFAD, which is Asian Federation Against Involuntary Disappearance, based in Philippines, which is a broader platform to fight enforced disappearances at Asia level and also across. Then we are also in affiliation with ICAID, which is a coalition, international coalition to fight enforced disappearances at world level. So the little donations which we receive from them are not enough, but at least it keeps us going. And mostly the lawyers which are with us don't take fees. So that is also very important. For some of the cases which are the top of the list and which are very important, we have to arrange fees with the help of the United Nations. Because we are an awardee of United Nations Victims of Torture Fund. So that is how we arrange psychosocial counseling as well, because the victims of enforced disappearance and torture usually end up into mental illnesses and depression and hallucination and that is why they are unable to continue their struggle. So we have arranged for them around 50 victims of enforced disappearance are treated with psychosocial counseling, and 10 to 15 cases of enforced disappearance are fought with top of the list lawyers in the country every year. And this we are doing for the last 2 years.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So now panelists are, feel free to ask questions from each other if you have any.
Well, can I ask question from Banu?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Banu, really your presentation was enlightening, and because Pakistan and Turkey have very good relations, and usually all the media in Turkey or in Pakistan is usually shut up for giving the true picture of what's happening in Turkey or what's happening in Pakistan. So maybe you also don't know about what actually the gravity of things are, like suppression and oppression on the human rights defenders, the journalists and all that. But I really feel that the situation in Turkey is really alarming. So is the international forums doing something for Turkey, like the UN, or just you are left with the, whatever resources you have or the voice you have in Turkey, which is, I can see that that's not enough.
Mm-hmm. Amina, UN has no force on countries to push them to do something. I mean, it's my teacher in law school used to say it's teethless. So it can't fight. But even European Court of Human Rights can't do anything for the last few years because Turkey refuses to comply with the decisions coming from the court, as it happened in Kavala's case. In case of European Union, Erdogan is bargaining on refugees very well with the European Union, so they are not very harsh of his government and his presidency, as we expect. The only thing they can do is to give some funds for the civil society to empower us, NGOs, and I think that's the only help we can get.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so if you don't mind, Mati, are you there? Matiullah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you,
Hello.
but we can't see you.
Just a minute. I was actually trying to bring my hands free. So I'll be with you on video in a moment.
Yeah, sure.
So you can go ahead and we can talk.
Yeah. So I have a question for you, and the question is that how do you see the role of journalists in judicial independence?
Okay. I think for Pakistan, the private media that we have experienced in 2002, with dozens of private television channels coming in, the journalists have become relatively more powerful and very important in our political developments. We have seen what happened 6 years after private media was allowed. It was about 5 years later, in 2007, our dictator, General Pervez Musharraf, was forced to resign through a lawyers' movement, which was for the first time in the history of the country covered live on television. The protests across Pakistan by the lawyers community and civil society against General Musharraf's forceful removal of the Superior Court judiciary. So I think media played a very historical role in that successful lawyers movement. after which the judges were restored when General Musharraf resigned and went away. So that was the first example. And second was the judicial activism, where the Supreme Court had been repeatedly taking on its own notices of human rights violations. And because of these notices and because of this judicial activism, many of the human rights issues were highlighted by the media, and the governments were forced to take corrective actions, remedial measures. So I think the judicial activism and particularly the court reporters, both of them together have really played an important role in creating awareness and highlighting the issues concerning the non-implementation of human rights. I will give an example of the missing persons cases. Although the missing persons case remains one of the biggest, what we can say is dilemma for our society and also for our judiciary. But the fact remains that the media and the judiciary, to some extent, was able to create an environment in which the powerful military establishment, which was the main accused in these missing person cases, they were forced to come up with some scheme and some policies through which they were made to answer for some of the questions. We were able to establish a judicial commission of missing persons, although that turned out to be a completely farce after about 12 years of its working. At the same time, there were information collected, there were people being questioned, there were people lists being prepared, and then the intelligence agencies came on record to defend themselves. But at the same time, the missing person issue remains a no-go area for many of the media organizations and the judiciary at large. So I think media continues to play an important role, particularly when the powerful military on the one side and the powerful judiciary on the other, they tend to assert and create more space for themselves at the cost of the elected governments and at the cost of the parliament's independence and supremacy. So media tries to also create a space for itself, although unfortunately it now is under greater control of the non-democratic and unconstitutional forces, contrary to what was supposed to be happening. That is media promoting democracy and strengthening democratic culture and freedoms and fundamental rights in Pakistan. So I think media continues to play an important role. And I feel that media, in spite of all those restrictions and problems and threats and coercion that it is facing, is relatively still far more free and independent than in some of the countries that we have just heard something about. So I think media in the coming days is going to become more bigger a player in countries like Pakistan with this digital revolution and internet revolution. So this is where now Pakistani media is heading, and it is becoming more and more difficult to regulate media. And the mainstream media, although the traditional television channels, private and state, are now becoming under greater control, coming under more and more control of the government and so-called regulatory bodies. At the same time, it is becoming harder for the social media to be controlled.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I've got one question from Emily Abreu. And the question is for both Aisha and Musharraf. It's open question. So any of you can answer to that question. So the question is, have there been any SLAPs, strategic lawsuits against public participation or judicial activism in relation to sovereign debts of countries and their managements? No.
In Turkey, not that I know. Yeah, no, I don't know any cases.
Not to my knowledge as well. Yeah.
Amina, would you like to respond? You're muted, yeah.
Well, Pakistan is not the country where they can have that kind of, activism to pay back their debts and to have such civil society, because the situation in Pakistan is a lot more grave than Turkey, maybe, because we almost defaulted. And economically, there are still challenges which are hanging all around, and we are unable to get IMF on board to get the loans which we need to run the country. So, but unfortunately, the civil society is handicapped. Either it's handicapped or it's too busy in the involvement of their day-to-day miseries which they have to face. So the economy is rather a very big topic to deal with. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to respond to this question by referring to one case decided by the Supreme Court of Pakistan, and that was about Rekodik project in one of the provinces of Balochistan. And that came into being as a result of international agreement. I think if I'm not wrong, the project was cancelled out by the Supreme Court of Pakistan, and as a result of which Pakistan had to owed a lot of money to international governments. And ultimately, I think the Turkish government intervened and somehow sorted out the matter. Well, any other questions? Okay, in that case, I would like to say thanks to all of our presenters and all those who registered for this event. There is another session which is going to take place at 2:30 p.m. I think 40 minutes after this session. So if you would like to join, I'm going to send you the attendees link, and you can join through that if you want to follow and watch that thing. In addition, we are going to publish an edited book collection, and I think all of the presenters have agreed to contribute to that. If any of the attendees who want to contribute to that collection, feel free, get in touch with me, and I will be able to provide you with the details. With this, I'm going to end the session and allow me to say thanks once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Bye.